So, and I was confused. Now what had happened was, whilst I'd been at university, I got lucky because I was the last year when it was £1,200 a year, so I just got in there. So I paid for my fees myself. I had a weekend job which paid for it. And at that place, it was only kind of, you know, medial sort of warehouse work. But at that place, there were about 1,000 staff who worked there, and it was 75% Muslim, Bengali brothers, Pakistani brothers, those kind of backgrounds. And so that's 75%, so that's what, 750 people, more or less. And I worked there, before I took the Shahada, I was there for about 2 years. And in those 2 years, out of 750 Muslims, guess how many spoke to me about Islam? One. Only one came to speak to me. And there were brothers who worked there who had big beards, they had the topi on, they used to come in wearing jubbas, everything. They never said a word to me. And there was just this one brother, and he was one of the managers there, he was a friend of mine. And he never used to speak about it to me in any depth. He wasn't trying to convert me or anything. He just used to say, oh, I'm just going to pray now. Oh, I believe this because I'm a Muslim. Oh, as Muslims, this is what we think. So it always stuck in my mind that, oh yeah, he's a Muslim. And he didn't seem particularly different to me. He was a nice guy. But I always just knew in my mind, all right, yeah, Muslim, yeah, okay. And I used to debate with some of the other Muslims as an atheist, and they used to say, you know, there is no God. And they didn't know it. And this is when I think back, subhanAllah, I used to have debates as an atheist with Muslims, and I used to wipe the floor with them. And I think, how is that possible? That the Muslims who I used to speak to, they didn't know enough about their deen to even stand up to me as an atheist who was ignorant. But it started to bug me even more and more. Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? Then it gets to a point where one day as I'm going up and down the aisles in the warehouse, I just thought, maybe I should ask my friend. And what had been going on in the news before this, to give you some background, was that the Danish cartoons of the Prophet ﷺ had been published. And there'd been things in the news and then they were reprinted again. And what I'd seen was that, these Muslims, whenever something happens, they all kind of get together and they stick up for what they believe in. And I used to think back to the Christians, and I used to think, well, whenever somebody says anything about them, they just kind of go, yeah, leave us alone. And I thought, oh, okay. So the Muslims, at least they've got something. They know what they believe in and they'll stand up for it. I thought, I wonder why. I wonder what it is that they've got that makes them do that. Because at the end of the day, I thought, it was all just hocus pocus anyway. But there must be something there. And as this kind of why am I here, it was coming up in my mind more and more. I thought, okay, I'll go and ask him. I'll just see what he's got to say. I wasn't thinking at this point, I'll look into Islam. I definitely wasn't thinking I'll become a Muslim. But I just thought, I'll see what he's got to say. Maybe he can just tell me something. So I went to see him. I went down to the department he was in and I went to find him. And he could see from my face that I was a bit distressed, that there was something on my mind. And I said, I've been thinking lately, is there more going on than what I can see, than what I know about? And his eyes lit up. And he was like, you mean, is there a God? And I said, well, maybe not that. I said, but we can discuss it if you want. And he said, okay, let's go and sit down. So we just sat down in the break room and he said, right. He said, first things first, he said, if I prove to you that God exists, what does that mean? And I thought, well, he's a blackguard, he's not going to be able to prove to me that God exists. I said, if you prove to me that God exists, that changes everything. I said, if God actually exists, then everything I know about life is completely changed. And he said, okay. He said, remember you said that. I said, I will, don't worry. And he said, right. He said, the thing is, we're in work, so if you want to discuss it, now is not really the time. He said, we'll meet up outside of work. So that's what we did a few days later, the Friday after that. And I met him and two other brothers, and we sat there and we discussed for quite some time. And really what I came out of that thinking was this whole thing again about not just why are you here, but where did you come from? Where was it that you actually came from? So I went home and I started thinking about that. And I thought, all right, where did I come from? I came from mum and dad, easy. And then I thought, okay, where did mum and dad come from? They came from grandma and granddad on either side. All right, where did they come from? And you can see a pattern, it went on and on and on. Now at this point I was still thinking, yeah, but where did mankind come from? Evolution, blah, blah, blah. And this is the thing, even if you take the argument now, it started to go on and on in my mind, and I thought, okay, let's take it right back. Where did mankind come from? Where did life come from? Where did the earth come from? Where did the universe come from? And I thought, all right, science, they say the Big Bang, that's what started it. Where did that come from? And I thought, okay, they say that the kind of the Big Bang was the start of everything, but for there to be a bang, it's a reaction. So what sort of caused that in the first place? And I thought, okay, if that was the start, it can't have been caused by anything else. But even the scientists, they now come up with this theory that there was matter and antimatter, they collided, whatever. There's a lot of different explanations for it, but they acknowledge that something was there before that, if that was even the start. And so I thought, okay, let's say something was there before it. And at the time I looked into this matter and antimatter thing, and they collided and there was a Big Bang. But what that meant was that the kind of laws of the universe were in place before the universe existed. So who put those laws there? Who wrote the rule book? So I thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. So where did that come from? And it went back and back and back. And I kept thinking, okay, everything has a cause and everything has an effect. So whatever was actually at the start, for it to basically be at the beginning, it can't have been caused by anything else. Otherwise, it's not the start. Therefore, whatever was actually at the beginning, by definition, there's only two ways to explain it. Either it decided to create itself, which is impossible because you can't think, right, I'm going to exist now and then appear. It's not possible. So the only other explanation is that it was there all along, that it was infinite. And so I thought, okay, it's infinite, it was there all along. What else can I kind of figure out about it? It's infinite, so that means it has no flaws. Because if it was there all along, if it had any kind of tiny little flaw, eventually it would kind of wither and die. So by definition, it's infinite and it's flawless. Also, if it's infinite and it's flawless, and it started everything off, it's intelligent. And if it's intelligent, then it's infinitely intelligent. And the other thing that I realized was that, okay, if it's infinite, you can only have one of it. Because if this one's infinite, and then there's a second one and he's infinite, they're only as big as each other. So there's a limit on them, so they're not infinite. And this is when I started to look back to Christianity, and I started to think, okay, they have the idea of the Trinity, which splits God into three parts. But that means that the size of God is 1 + 1 + 1. So they've put a limit on how big God could possibly be. So I started to think, okay, it's infinite, so it's boundless, it's beyond my mind. And I went back to my friend and I said, okay, this is where I'm at. I know there's something out there, it's infinite. I'm not calling it God, and I'm certainly not calling it Allah at this point, but I'm saying, okay, I know there's something out there. And he says, okay, he says, right, let's talk about the Quran. And I didn't really know anything about it at the time, so I said, all right, let's talk about it. And I went away and I researched it, and what I found was that it's not so much a book as a series of verses. And these verses, they came down 1400 years ago, and they deal with themes that are so deep and so beautiful, and rules for every aspect of how to live your life. And they talk about enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, standing up for what's right. They talk about justice, they explain that there's a creator. And all these verses, they came down from the mouth of a man who couldn't even read, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this was at a time when the Arabic language itself was at its peak. There were poets there who could come out with amazing verses of poetry. And these people didn't believe that this book was from God. And they used to say, no, he's made it up, whatever. And so in the Quran I find out that there's a challenge. And it's reiterated quite a few times. But in Surah Hud verse 13, it actually says, if you don't believe that this book is from God, and if you think it can come from the mind of a man, then produce 10 chapters like what you see in this book. And nobody could do that at the time, and there were these amazing poets, and none of them could do it, but they still didn't believe. And then it comes down again, later on, it says, okay, right, just one chapter, see if you can do that. And the shortest chapter in the Quran is 3 lines. So it's basically saying, give me 3 lines. If you can do that, 3 lines like what you see in this book, then that means this book has come from a man. And if you've done that, then this book's not true. But if you can't do it, then where did this book come from? And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Has anyone ever been able to do that? And I looked into it and I find out that in the 1400 years, the people who've tried to stop the spread of Islam, they've tried everything, military attacks, everything, propaganda wars, everything. But if they really want to stop it, all they've got to do is 3 lines, and they can't do it. And there are whole institutions. SOAS, the university, was set up with this purpose. Entire Orientalist movement set up with this purpose. A place in Germany, Quran for Shunga, was set up with this purpose to disprove the Quran, and none of them could do it. And there were professors who were paid millions. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. I definitely can't disprove this, but still, I didn't accept it. And I thought, okay, right, fine, I'm just going to kind of leave that on the side. And anyway, I carried on living my life, and it used to bug me that I know that these two things are definitely true. There's a creator, and that there's this Quran, and I can't disprove either of these two things. But maybe it was pride or fear or something that I didn't actually kind of take the next step. And what happened then was there was a weekend when I was sat at work, and I was sat with a Muslim guy and a non-Muslim guy. And the Muslim guy starts talking, and he says to the other guy, he says, don't you believe in God? And the guy goes, no. And he goes, yeah, but why not? You should believe in God. And the guy goes, prove to me that God exists. And this Muslim guy, his discussions weren't the best. He started to say, you know, look at the trees, man. The trees, don't they prove that God exists? And he goes, look, it says Allah in your hand, to a guy who doesn't even know the Arabic language or what it looks like or anything. He says, look, don't you believe? And he started to kind of get torn apart in this discussion, and I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to step in. I've got to help him. So I did. And I started telling this non-Muslim guy about Islam when I was still a non-Muslim. And we went through the whole discussion, and he said to me, he went, you know what, that's interesting, but I don't care. And he got up and he walked off. And I thought, okay, I've just sat there and I've convinced him that this is definitely true and that the Quran is definitely true, and he still hasn't accepted it. What an idiot. And I sat there for a bit and I thought, wait a minute, I've convinced myself that this is true and that the Quran is true, and I still haven't accepted it. And so I stopped what I was doing, I stood up and I went and I walked and I found my friend, and I just looked at him and he looked at me and he knew what I wanted, and he went, yeah? I went, yeah. And the Friday after that, alhamdulillah, I took the Shahada. Now, I'm running out of time, but there's just one last point that I really would like to make.